Crisis podcast will touch on sensitive topics regarding the human body, sexuality, pregnancy, and all aspects of women's healthcare, and may not be suitable for all listeners.
Hello, I'm Kate.
I'm PR, and this is the Midwife Crisis, because it's not just you. Well, it's the Midwife Crisis podcast. We're not having a crisis. It's the podcast.
Sometimes we have a crisis.
Sometimes everybody has a crisis, but we're not the only ones having a crisis,
Yep.
which is why we do the podcast.
That was
because
perfect.
It's not just you.
I really like that. I like that you went super deep on that.
I did, and then I had to swim back to the surface.
Oh, gosh. All right. Today, we want to talk to you guys about something that can be both heavy and light. And that is body weight and body composition and how it does and doesn't affect your health as a person with female at birth parts.
Talking about going deep, this is a little bit, we're going to skim a little bit of the surface here, but it will give you some food for thought for sure.
Before you start talking, let me just show of hands, even though it's a podcast, who feels personally victimized when they walk into the doctor's office, healthcare office, whatever, and the first thing you do is get on the scale?
Everybody raise your hand.
What the hell?
Yes.
You know, it's like they're so focused on it. It's just
the very first thing is get on the scale. And I have to say something like, I'm not taking off my boots. I have a lot of weighty objects in my pockets.
Yeah.
Phone, keys, every laptop is in my back pocket. I have everything. So
the first thing I do is ask how much weight they'll subtract if I take nothing off. And then mentally determine how heavy my shoes are. And then I'll take my shoes, coat. When I was pregnant with Max, I think I talked about this, but I hit 199 at my last visit. And I refused to be 200 pounds. And I took my pants off. And they were like, no. And I just took my pants. I just took my pants off because I was really losing it by then anyway. And I was 199.4. And I was like, great. And then I had a baby. But it's we get so crazy about weight. And then you get your blood pressure taken.
Yeah.
Right after. And you're like, oh my God. So, sorry. Side note. Just wanted to throw that out there. Make sure we weren't the only ones who don't love the scale.
The only ones. It's not just you. It's not just us. 199.4. That's like my fantasy weight. How dare you use that number? That's my goal weight.
It felt really just this thing that I couldn't, it just felt like this threshold that I shouldn't cross. And
yes.
I had gained too much weight according to my starting weight. So really I shouldn't have. And I just set that as a marker. And for whatever reason, it put me right over the edge, taking my pants off. And I work in that office now, and they remember it. One of the secretaries is always like, yeah, remember when you took your pants off? I'm like, yeah, I do. And I did not ask permission. So I assaulted everyone. So I do actually apologize retroactively, but
that is that's a funny story. And I think me mentioning that that's my goal weight brings us to some important points that we're going to discuss later. That you, who had two humans sharing one body, weighed what my goal weight is.
And actually, I see that all the time. When I'm admitting patients in labor and I see their weight and I'm like, cool. She's full-term pregnant and we weigh the same. You know, it's
and there's no other humans in here.
Yeah.
In this little body of mine.
Yep.
Well, little if you are Gulliver looking at me from Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah.
Anywho, enough self-deprecation.
That's right.
Let's talk about a little bit of serious stuff. And first, we're going to address traditional measures of weight as it relates to health. And the first piece, which I've always had trouble with, but I don't have another tool or so many tools in the toolbox with regard to this, is BMI, body mass index. And it's like a cuss word to some people.
Boo.
And it's calculated using weight and height to determine whether one's body is at or over their ideal weight. Mm-hmm. And so there's a formula for calculating it, but it's much easier to just go look up a chart and plot yourself.
Yeah. It's like using a map, if anyone remembers how to do that.
Based on, how tall you are and how much you weigh and kind of plotting it. And, it doesn't, most of those charts don't divide you from between male and female or any of that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that a little bit too and what the flaws are. Another tool is waist measurement. So if most of your fat is around your waist, you had a greater chance for developing risk factors for heart disease and diabetes. So if you're shaped like an apple, they say.
I hate these.
Right? So I'm going to bring
Who's going to be like, I'm shaped like an apple?
I'm gonna bring it up. Yes, like an apple with two sticks sticking out of it. I'm bringing up all the bad stuff.
Yep.
Then you're at greater chance for developing risk factors for heart disease and diabetes. Or I've heard this one, if you're shaped like a kind of a linebacker. Who says that? That's just so mean. Anyways, measure your waist.
Except for linebackers who are like, I feel great that I look like a linebacker.
Of course
I don't
would.
even know what sport that
they
is.
would not. That's football. And they would not feel great if someone said you look like a pear, which is desirable for a female.
I don't like men want to be like an upside down triangle or something. That's like a good shape.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the linebacker.
Okay.
But it's bad
Got
when
it.
you're a woman and you look like a linebacker.
Yeah.
And that's also kind of the apple. So, which I never got that. I'm like, that doesn't look like a freaking apple.
One of my friends used to say she was
apples?
shaped like SpongeBob because she was just kind of like shoulders,
Yes,
waist,
some
hips were
people-
like all the same.
Yes.
And I feel like that's a really good,
No,
that's a really good
no.
description. It's like, it's not nice to yourself or to anyone, but I feel like you can really get that visual really good with the SpongeBob.
And I know, regretfully, I've said that. Some people will say, well, what does she look like? And I was like, kind of like SpongeBob. She's just kind of short and kind of square.
I look like
And-
Patrick
Oh, really?
because I'm a pear.
Pear. Yes. I'm a pear too. And I remember one time my daughter was a little bit overweight when she was growing up before she sort of went tall and then got her womanly figure. She's
Yeah.
really, by our standards, very beautiful. And she says, I look like a can. That's what she said to me. We were in the dressing room one day. She tried on something gray. She said, I look like a can.
Oh.
So all of this is kind of discussions about body image and
Yeah.
what people see when they look at themselves and how they feel about themselves. So back to the waist measurements. How you do this is measure your waist by placing a measuring tape snugly around your waist.
Yeah.
And your waist measurement is high if it is greater than 35 inches for women or greater than 40 inches for men. And okay.
I don't know. I take
Moving
some issue with that,
on.
but we'll see the next one.
Moving on, waist to hip ratio. So in this case, you're going to measure both your waist and hip circumferences, like measure around with the tape measure, and then divide the waist measurement by the hip measurement. In women, the ratio should be 0.8 or less, and in men, it should be 1 or less. This means that in women, the waist should be narrower than the hips, and in men, the waist should be narrower or the same as the hips.
That's that like 38, 24, 36, only if she's 5'2".
36. No,
Is that the
that's
right
not-
numbers? Baby
That's
got
not-
back.
that's
Don't be
not
mad at me.
You're mixing it all up. Haven't I taught you anything?
I'm sorry. I tried.
Brick house,
Yes.
36, 24, 36. I'm going to have to teach. You're going to have to learn
Okay.
some things because this is out of control.
I'm thinking Sir Mix-a-Lot. Baby got back. Isn't that what he says?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I don't know. We're gonna double check it.
That's Brick House is 36, 24, 36. Sir Mix-a-Lot is Baby Got Back, and he likes that back, too.
No, I know. I got the numbers wrong.
Okay.
Anyway.
Let's just stop. So anyhow, which way is the best way? Talk to me.
To measure. Yeah. So basically, historically and traditionally, and all of our research and kind of what PR was saying is that is BMI. Like that's what all the main info that we have is based off of. But as we sort of touched on, BMI definitely has its limitations. So it doesn't take into account your body composition. And it doesn't account for whether your weight is fat or whether your weight is muscle. And so it's a major limitation because in someone who's very muscular, you think like a gymnast,
Right.
muscle weighs more than fat.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. And so it can say that they're overweight. And here they are, probably the healthiest person you could even imagine,
Yeah.
And, conversely, in elderly populations, they have very low muscle mass. So when you look at that population, it can say, oh, yeah, they're a normal weight because their weight's okay, but they can be actually overweight or sort of have those risk factors because they have predominantly more body fat. So,
and many of these charts, as I said earlier, they don't differentiate between men and women. So it's just going by your height. The assumption is that if you are 5'5", 6'7", you must be a female, or people just sort of surmise that, and you put your weight, you plot your weight in. And if you're 6, then you must be a male, which I know there are women who are 6'6". Go to a basketball game, a WNBA basketball game, and you're going to see all those women,
right,
many of them over 6 feet tall. And so it's just really not a fair. I don't have another tool to replace it. So, and I've always been a person that, when you complain about something, you need to have a suggestion for something better. But it's an unfair tool. And so I've always used it very gingerly when I'm talking to patients about their situation.
Absolutely. I have this very vivid memory of my first understanding and knowledge of BMI, which was doing the physical fitness test in gym class in high school. And I remember
really?
They would send you to the nurse and get your height and weight. And then you would come into the gym in line, look at the chart, find your number, and then you had to record your number. And I remember looking, sort of eyeballing, seeing that my number was going to be in the overweight range, and then choosing a different number. Because I was a bigger, girl. I was as compared to my friends. They were wearing, this is a throwback, but they were wearing limited 2, which I don't think exists anymore. And I couldn't fit. I was wearing limited. You know what I mean? So it was that was what it was. And it's not that I was morbidly obese, but I was overweight by BMI standards, and I was so embarrassed. I didn't want my whole class to know, what my weight was. And I think that really does something to you, and research has actually shown that women, when guessing if they're overweight or, what their body status is, they will overestimate their body status. So women will assume that they're overweight or even obese without even taking their measurements, without even, measuring their hips, measuring their waist, looking at their BMI. When a lot of times these women don't have centralized obesity. And it makes me wonder if this focus on weight throughout the whole lifespan is helpful or harmful,
I don't see how it can really be helpful per se. I think you need to focus on the root of whatever it is that's causing the person to be overweight or underweight or whatever you think the appropriate weight should be. And that's very interesting that you were talking about research that women will overestimate their whatever they think their BMI is, that they think that it's a little bit higher. And that's interesting because I think that in my culture that women will they'll estimate under. They're like, what do you mean I'm obese? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
My person likes it, my man, my woman, whoever it is, they like it. And I feel good.
Yeah.
So I don't see what your problem is. And so then then a fight ensues.
Yeah.
So, but when you have to be very careful. I think it's always meeting people where they are, because there are harmful effects of this focusing on weight throughout the lifespan, as in disorders like bulimia and anorexia, binging, purging. And some of these things go on and people don't even realize they're doing it.
Yep, absolutely.
If you're starving yourself, you kind of know, I'm kind of starving myself. But things like binging, you're just eating, that cake was good, so I ate it.
Yeah.
A cake? Really? Well, we were watching Netflix all night, so we were just eating. And so by some standards, you'd be binging because did you eat till you were full, or you just kept on eating because you could?
Yeah.
So, and then getting rid of it because you felt horrible. You felt horrible emotionally, or you didn't feel horrible emotionally. You just felt sick because you ate too daggone much.
Right.
So you just had to go get it out.
Yeah.
And so it just, there's a link to self-esteem, to depression, to eating disorders, when there is that focus, that lifelong focus, especially on your weight, on how you look and your body image.
Can I ask you a question? Did you grow up acknowledging your body size, your body composition, your weight? Was that something that was brought up to you growing up, or?
Never.
Never.
It wasn't. And when I went to high school, once in a while I would say things like, maybe I could lose 10 pounds. to be in a conversation.
Yeah.
But that was just BS.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really want to lose 10 pounds. Or did I really think I needed to lose 10 pounds? Or was I intending to do anything to lose 10 pounds?
Right.
So someone talked about dieting to me. And I said to them, I had 3 children long ago. I said, like after they were born. And that's when I first tried dieting, like a Weight Watchers kind of thing. My youngest at that point was probably like 9 years old.
Yeah.
And I said, that wasn't a thing in my family.
Right.
Diet? I'm like, what are you talking about?
So this is so interesting to me. And again, this is where that like cultural difference between us comes in, because I grew up always being aware of my weight, and my mom was too, and her mother was too. You know, I remember my Nana telling a story of she was walking up the front walk of her mother's house, and her mother said, "Oh, I didn't recognize you. I just saw some fat woman walking up." And that's how she talked to her. And so, and my grandmother was beautiful, but she was curvy and big boned. I mean, like she had a collarbone on her that looked like it could be someone's femur. Like, you know, like she was just like big, like literally big boned, even, you know, when she was elderly. And so my mom grew up kind of feeling that way. And my mom grew up super, super, super skinny. And then after having kids, I remember her like doing the workout videos and like drinking the Diet Cokes and limiting the food because she was so like stressed about being overweight. And I remember being told by them like, "Oh, you better be careful." You know, I'd go to eat like a piece of cake and they'd be like, "Oh, you got to be careful. Don't eat that." You know, I was talking to actually my husband about Elio's pizza. It comes frozen in like a big piece, and I snapped off a piece, and he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, this is 3 pieces." And he's like, "Never in my life have I seen anyone snap off a piece, but when I grew up, I would eat just the 1 piece because I was so scared of being fat."
Oh, wow.
So it's like, you know, you're saying the first diet you ever tried, you know, your youngest was
like,
9. I was like trying to diet. Yeah, I was like trying to diet in like 4th grade. So it's like so interesting to me to hear you talk like that. And I'm trying so desperately to raise my children differently, to break that cycle, because it has been very harmful. I mean, for all intents and purposes, at this point in my life, I'm probably the healthiest I've ever been. But I have, you know, disordered eating, and I have definitely been someone who purges and binges and looks at myself in the mirror and is like, "Ugh, you look disgusting," and I'm actually okay, you know, have that body dysmorphia. And I don't want that for my children. And interestingly, we focus on it from the moment they're born. They're put on this chart, you know, and it's like, well, where do you fall on the chart? And one of my children has always been less than 10th percentile. And so we're really focusing right now a lot on being overweight. But as someone who is a tiny child, who's just a tiny child on his own growth curve, I mean, they put us through hell, making us feel like, why is he's so small in weight? And at one point they said, well, just give him Haagen-Dazs every day. And I said, this is my toddler who eats the most well-rounded diet I've ever seen a child eat in my life, who enjoys food. Why would I do that to him? Why would I start that? And this is a pediatrician telling me to make my child have like disordered eating. So, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff we really have to like reevaluate. So yeah, I just was curious because when you were talking about it, it was sort of coming to me that maybe you had a different upbringing than I did.
I did, for sure. And, you know, I have relatives in my family that are thin, and some, you know, I was kind of raised with my mom and her sisters, and her sisters were, some of them were overweight, and my mom was really thin. And so it ran the range, but no one even said, I need to lose weight. They just, once in a while, they might say, I should stop drinking. And maybe I'll lose 5 pounds or something. But yeah, that was probably as far as it went. That had more to do with drinking than it had to do with eating. No one was going to stop eating for any reason.
Well, I love that. And I tell my patients a lot that food has so many uses, right? So it's emotional and it's social and it's also nutritional. And so we have to balance that.
Yeah, you do. Definitely. I don't know that my children, I mean, they know the same love for food that our whole family has, and that food is love for us. But they, you know, they were all, as you say, off the charts.
Yeah.
And so, especially my oldest, he was like a big kid when he was born, and even all growing up, you know, they're like, he's brawny and he's strong, and he associated that with eating.
Yeah.
Like, keep eating and it'll keep.
Yeah.
And so he he at one point became overweight, and the pediatrician said, well, he's going to get a growth spurt. And he eventually did, but he started working on, doing sports and that kind of thing and working on his weight himself. And I never said to him, you need to work on your weight. And the same thing with my youngest, who felt her own way about it, because I think that children brought it up to her.
Right.
And I said, well, I talked to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, well, she'll have a growth spurt. And I remember my oldest son saying, well, what is she going to be, 7 feet tall?
Yeah.
And I said, that's mean. And
kids are mean, though. Kids
happened,
are honest.
I mean, this is the same thing you went through. I don't understand.
Right.
And so it's very interesting how they sort of absorbed, and they would. People will. They'll take, you teach them a certain thing, or you raise them a certain way, and then they take in parts of society and the media. There's a big, we'll get to that a little bit, but there's a big influence now, much more so than when I was younger.
Yeah.
We didn't see people on TV that looked like us, so we weren't trying to copy those people.
Right.
But now you see all kinds of things on all kinds of media, all kinds of venues, and so it's sort of, do I fit in? Where do I fit in?
Yeah. So coming back to our measurement tools, some of our newer research suggests that just the waist or waist to hip ratio, which are the other two measurements we have, are actually more accurate at predicting cardiovascular risk than BMI. So that's wonderful. And I think potentially that causes a little bit less distress for patients. It's like the scale, as we said, has always been a stressor. And so to take that away is kind of lovely. And knowing that weight and body composition are just a small part of our health equation, but are a part of health, and discussing them can cause distress to patients. Why do we do it?
Discussing them really can cause a lot of distress to patients. I know colleagues who have gone to see certain providers and had that person address their weight as soon as they walked in the door. And I think to myself, you look a lot smaller than I am, so I wish that person would say something to me about my weight.
Or, interestingly, now we have electronic records, whereas forever and ever and ever, your provider would write whatever they wanted in your chart and you would never see it.
Right.
And now with electronic records, you can see even your office notes and things. And so people will sometimes get upset because they'll see what we call the problem list, or what I tell patients is it's what's special about you. So what makes your care different than someone else's is what we put in that list.
Yes.
And sometimes it'll have the BMI in there, or it'll say obese, or it'll say what category of obesity. And it's upsetting for people. And they'll say, I want that taken out of my chart. And it's like, well,
it's not untrue.
Yeah, sometimes it's part of that health equation. So it's
not untrue. Part of it is what how you feel about yourself, but the other part of it is how it's going to affect your health. So that's what's the concern for us, which brings me to, let's start with overweight. How ways that being overweight can affect your GYN health.
Okay.
Because it can. And it can cause a host of things: abnormal uterine bleeding and ovulation if your periods are irregular. And some of these things we'll find, we'll talk about that they can, if you're underweight also. But let's just talk about overweight right now. Infertility, uterine prolapse, which is when your uterus or your cervix sort of falls into your vagina, or even sometimes outside of it if you've had children. Incontinence.
And those kind of go hand in hand, just because the pelvic floor is supporting your whole body.
Relaxed.
So you say if it's holding a lot of weight or extra weight, it's tired.
Right. And I say to folks that your pelvic floor is kind of like a hammock. And so when you get a hammock, it's when you first put it up, it's kind of taut and it holds up really well. But every summer, if you don't adjust it, it starts to sag and sag and sag.
Before you know it, your butt's dragging on the grass.
Yeah. Before you know it, your uterus is dragging on the grass. Incontinence, there's an increased risk of polyps and fibroids, and a higher incidence of comorbidities after GYN surgery. So now here's the issue. If you have estrogen and you have extra tissue, like if you're heavier and so you have more fatty tissue, more adipose tissue, it's going to rest. That estrogen's going to sit in those tissues, and you're going to hold on to more of it than you normally would. And so that is what causes you to have this growth of things like polyps and fibroids and have issues with. It stands to reason that if you have think about it, if you have well, first, before I get here, that's going to cause you to have some issues with your bleeding, because if your hormones are out of whack, then you're not going to be ovulating like you would expect to,
right?
That's something that could lead to infertility. You're going to have abnormal bleeding, because when you're not ovulating like you're supposed to, then you'll have periods that are helter-skelter. They're all over the place and not what you would expect to be on a monthly cycle. And so that's the ways in which these things can affect your health. The other thing is that, folks who are very heavy have a higher risk of endometrial cancer.
That's right.
That's recent studies have shown. And so I think that that's something that we don't, there are some things in our lives that we can control.
Right.
And some things that we can not control. And so this is something that sometimes it's even just a 10% loss of your weight that will make a huge difference in your health. It's not saying if you weigh my goal weight of 199, 200 pounds. So if I lose 20 pounds, that doesn't sound like that it's not possible, an impossible task. But it could make a huge difference if I'm having some of those kinds of issues and not developing those future problems.
Right.
And if you happen to need surgery, you're going to have you could potentially have some issues with your healing for the surgery. Because you think about it, if you have an incision and you have to go through not just the normal parts of your body, but also a whole lot of layer of adipose tissue, which is fatty tissue, that causes problems. And very often your incision will open back up. Yeah. And you'll have a higher risk of infection.
Sometimes the way that your skin and your tissue folds can, cause bacteria and moisture to kind of get down there. And yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. And even anesthetic complications, it can affect your airway. It can affect, all of that. So.
And sometimes because you are heavier, you need more medication for things and that kind of stuff. So just like, people think, well, I'm heavier, so I have to drink more to get to where you are, because you're not. It's kind of the same deal with the medications that you need. And so these are things that we are contemplating when we're kind of talking to you about problems that you may be having. So it isn't because we want to be picking on you, especially I think that midwives and APRNs and people like that are very sensitive, and physicians there are some who are very woke, and so they're paying attention too. I find that it's more men who are commenting on people's bodies than
that's true.
More women are more conscious of how someone feels about that, and more sensitive. Yep. And so at least just in conversations, that's what I've discovered. And so but it isn't just no one's trying to make you feel bad. It's also because we have serious and legit concerns about what's going on with you.
Yep. So we had touched upon how there are some overlaps with ways that being underweight can affect your GYN health. And so some of those overlaps are things like ovulatory dysfunction and abnormal uterine bleeding, which PR talked about, which can lead to things like infertility. So those things come hand in hand, because again, if you're underweight, females have, I always talk about this with my patients, we have hips and thighs and breasts to help support basically the function of having children, and listen, trust me when I tell you, I know that we are so much more than, just a womb for sure. But, talking about it in an anthropologic way, that's what we're sort of like put here to do, is make babies. And so our bodies are made to do that. And so when you're significantly underweight, those things can be affected. Women who start out underweight can have a later onset of menarche or their period. They can have a delay of sex characteristics. So, think hips and breasts and that kind of thing. They have increased incidence sometimes of vitamin deficiencies and anemias, because maybe they're really thin because of malabsorption or something like that. So, They have increased risk of osteoporosis. So again, kind of the skinnier, the smaller you are, the increased risk of osteoporosis, which is where your bones get sort of holy and they're more likely to have fracture. And then again, also complications with surgery. So just like you might need more anesthesia if you're a little bit overweight, you might need a lot less if you're underweight. They may have a difficult time, sort of maintaining that. And healing can also be affected. So if you have a poor nutritional status, again, your tissue's not going to heal as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were saying something, and I was thinking I wanted to comment on that, but it just kind of went out of my old head.
Should we take a quick break and then come back to this?
I think we should.
Okay.
We're going to take a quick station break, and we'll be back. Thank you for listening.
Greetings, and this is Wine Time with Grown Ass Woman, an intergenerational conversation with Ife Michelle. I'm Sexty.
And Sharon Leanne. You make me want to add a name. Make sure you hit us up. We want to hear from you. Again, our email is
gawomenspeak@gmail.com.
We're back, and you're listening to the Midwife Crisis podcast, where today we're talking about weight and body image. And so we had just actually left off on discussing sort of how your GYN health, your gynecologic health, can be affected by, sort of the extremes in body weight. So when you're overweight and underweight. And we've talked a little bit about how we talk to our patients. At my annual visits, I always ask my patients, how do you feel about your body? If they feel like they have a well-balanced diet, if they feel like they do a good amount, at least 3 times a week, of some standardized activity that increases their heart rate. I find many women who are over or underweight are aware of that. Like we, even with body dysmorphia and even with self-esteem issues, you kind of know.
Right.
Usually have some kind of idea. And oftentimes people that are in either of those scenarios are working towards improving their health. I've been told by many of my patients that have either transferred into me, sometimes have switched providers, especially if they're overweight, that again, they're aware, and it's really offensive to them if it's assumed by their healthcare provider that they're sedentary or that they have a poor diet. And that's really frustrating. I've been told by underweight patients that oftentimes no one even addresses diet or exercise with them because they're just like, oh, you're skinny, so you're fine, and it's they may not be healthy. They may be like, dude, I'm eating Taco Bell every day. And, it's that we need to be addressing things. So I think coming from, just like with everything, coming to a patient with openness, without assumptions, and allowing them to tell us about what makes them them, and allowing them to tell us about how they feel about their bodies. And again, that will be helpful to us, because if they say, listen, I know I'm overweight, I've struggled with, anorexia, and I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm working on it, I've got a therapist, that's going to change the way you talk to that patient about it. And with that awareness, we're allowing them to share. And so I think that is, I don't know, for me, that's sort of how I approach it. I don't know. What do you think, Pierre?
I think that I try to meet folks, like I said, where they are.
Yep.
I look for trends. So if there's a sharp increase in your weight, then I sort of mention that you've gained some weight. Was that intentional? What was going on? What is going on? And usually that sort of opens the door for them to, without judgment, for them to just explain what happened. Or you lost weight.
Yep.
What's happening with that? And I don't assume that because they lost weight that is a good thing.
Right.
Until they tell me it's a
Right.
good thing. Like I was using, whatever program they were using to try to lose weight.
Or my kid's really sick and I'm getting a divorce. And
Right. So because it could be a lot of emotional stuff like that.
Right.
So I let them explain. And then if it's something good, I say fantastic. And if not, then I say, well, what are you doing to support yourself?
Yeah.
So that because you need to be nourished regardless of your size. So I basically kind of just meet folks wherever they are, and I look for trends in their weight. And some folks have been overweight their entire lives. And so meeting me isn't going to be magical and they're going to all of a sudden like drop 40 pounds. That's
Right.
just some craziness.
Right.
And I pick my spots. What's most important message for you to have when you leave your visit with me?
That's right.
What are the 1, 2, 3 things tops that I want you to walk out the door thinking about? And it isn't often your weight.
Yeah.
That's not.
And also, what feeling do you want them to leave with, right? Like, are they comfortable, or are they like leaving here feeling defeated? Like,
Yeah,
that's awful.
the
I've
worst.
been there.
Yeah, that is the worst. And I have too. And I mainly only been there in pregnancy where I was just, berated for gaining weight and for some of what I was eating. And I just said, I don't want to see that provider anymore.
Yeah.
And in the end, I became good friends with that person. But for that time in my life, I just said, I want to avoid that person.
Yeah.
And then it came down to, well, you know what? This is like roulette. You might land on her call.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to try and work this out so that you come to some kind of an agreement so you guys can work on it. But I felt like I went to the car and I cried because it wasn't just talking about your concerns. It was, as I said, it was a berating.
Yeah.
It was, and I think that that's really important, that you not make people feel small.
Yeah, absolutely. I've already talked about how I was uncomfortable with my weight gain in pregnancy, and I remember I wasn't like out with my pregnancy yet because I had had my loss and I had my infertility stuff, and I just was like, I don't know, I didn't want to share yet. And I remember when it sort of came out that I was pregnant, and a provider that wasn't in the group that I went to was like, "Yeah, you guys didn't know? Look at her face; she's shaped like a moon." And I just was like, what the hell? Like, it made me feel terrible. Like, you don't talk to someone like that,
No.
I just, so yeah, we have to consider those things.
So, see, my sharp tongue, I would have quickly said, what's your excuse? Are you pregnant too?
No, I didn't. I was just like, yeah, I totally look like a moon. And I like went in
I
the locker
know.
room and cried.
I know, because that's you. And I'm a brawler. I'm definitely a brawler. Like, and why is your face like that?
No, my God.
What's your issue? So yeah,
Yeah.
and people say your comebacks are so quick. I said sometimes they're not appropriate, but
That's okay.
if I feel like you're trying to cut me, then I'm gonna get my sword out and cut you back.
Yep.
Anyway, we talked a little bit about weight measurements. You want to talk about obstetrics?
Sure. So, yeah, when you're considered overweight and you're starting out in a pregnancy, there are some slightly increased risks. So, things like miscarriage, gestational diabetes, which is diabetes that only occurs during pregnancy, preeclampsia, which is a disease of pregnancy, but it stems around having mostly a high blood pressure. I wrote veno thromboembolism, which, hello, a blood clot. I should have just written that.
Right.
But you're at an increased risk for having blood clots. And these are all things that you're at a risk for being pregnant. So it's not that you're, just alone from being overweight or putting yourself at these risks, but there are things that are slightly increased.
Right.
When you're overweight, you have a slightly increased risk of needing to be induced for labor. So meaning we have to kind of push you into labor. You have an increased risk of C-section. And of course, with that, potential anesthetic complications and wound infections. And according to the National Institute of Health, women who are overweight are less likely to initiate or maintain breastfeeding and may struggle more with breastfeeding. And so again, when we go back to those hormonal issues that we talked about that sometimes have to do with fat and have to do with those hormonal
Right.
changes, you may not have that lactogenesis, that, initial startup of making milk. It may not be as strong. You may not produce as much. And of course, all of those things end up going hand in hand and circular, because we know that women who breastfeed typically lose weight faster after they deliver. And so it's just sort of a cycle.
It does become a cycle.
Yeah.
And then their babies, if you're not breastfeeding, you tend to formula feed, which if you look at the literature, those babies are overfed.
Yeah.
They tend to be overfed, and so
Yeah, and not on purpose. We love
not
our
on
babies, and
yeah,
we know
sure.
we're trying to keep them healthy. But babies' bellies are so small, and their nutritional needs are so little.
They're little.
Yeah.
They're limited. I remember my family saying, "You're always feeding that boy. Maybe you should just put some cereal in his bottle,
Yeah.
in a bottle for him." And I was like, in his bottle? What bottle? The bottle of my boobs that I'm wearing?
You're just
They
gonna
were like,
pour some dry cereal in his
"Give
mouth
him a
and then
bottle."
squirt some milk into it.
Give him a bottle. And I said, he's building his milk up to where to the level that he requires.
Right.
And that takes time. But like Kate was saying, if you might have issues with there are certain switches that go on and off when we're pregnant into postpartum period, and when you're not pregnant. So hormonal switches, and so sometimes that switch doesn't switch on and off
Right.
if you have like an abundance of weight, and it makes certain hormones hang around and others not kick in. So that can be an issue. When you're underweight, there are also some increased risk. You have risk of preterm birth, of something called SGA, which is small for gestational age, which means your baby's smaller than you would think it would be for the age that it is when it's born. And you can also have issues with difficulty breastfeeding. And I want to point out that breastfeeding has nothing to do with the size of your breasts.
That's true.
I think
is 100%
that's an
true.
important point,
Yeah.
that people look at themselves and they say, I don't think I have any milk, because it's just either because milk wasn't coming out while they were pregnant, which is not necessary, or because they have small breasts and they say, I don't think I don't know. Do
Yeah.
you think this will work? And that one really has nothing to do with the other.
That's absolutely right. I know tons of people with super tiny boobs who've made boatloads of milk.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I know people with enormous breasts that struggle to produce. So that you're absolutely
Yes.
right. Those things really are not involved. So what can we do to minimize all these risks? What can we do for our patients? This is our job. We're trying to sort of create the best and safest and healthiest environment for them to live and grow babies and be their best selves, right? So part of it is identifying patients who may be at risk. And so especially early on in pregnancy, having an honest communication with them and being open and saying, listen, you are overweight, and I think it would be okay if you only gained 5 pounds the whole pregnancy, or even no pounds. And whereas some people might say you're eating for 2 or you need those 300 extra calories a day, you really don't. So,
Right.
We need to kind of look at that and finding a sensitive way to do so. There's ways to say to someone, this is what our plan is, and this is to keep you and your baby healthy, versus just being like, well, you're fat, so don't gain any weight, which
And
I've kind of heard people
I've
say
heard
it that
people
way.
say that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to work with our patients and families to come up with safe and healthy and reasonable goals. So just like what PR was saying, no one's going to walk out of our visit and be like, I'm going to lose 40 pounds right now, but to say to them, hey, it would be a great goal is let's try not to gain any weight before the next OB visit, or,
Absolutely.
how about for this coming year, we're going to try to maintain our weight or lose 5 pounds, that kind of thing. Just something that's really an attainable and healthy goal. And we have resources that we can reach out to. There's nutritional counseling to help someone either maintain weight, maybe even increase their weight. If we've got someone who's underweight and we can say, hey, how can we get you to get these calories in? Something I actually see in pregnancy that a lot of people don't talk about is women losing weight when they were sort of normal or underweight to begin with because they just don't feel well. And so we then need to struggle on how do we get this nutrition into them and
Right.
creative ways to do that. So it's not always about weight loss, it's sometimes about,
You can put it on and make sure that you're
Exactly.
nourishing the baby as well as you can.
Exactly. And certainly in the case of pregnancy, encouraging, safe exercises and activities. We know a lot of women, their mom tells them you're not allowed to do, exercise in pregnancy. And that's not true. We know
What?
I've heard that from many people and exercise, that's reasonable, that gets your heart rate up, but that you're comfortable doing in pregnancy can decrease all those risks that you're at risk for. So we can kind of, negate those risks a little bit by having you be active, by having you, maintain exercise goals and not smoking and no drug use and all of that, basic stuff that we don't want anyone to do. But again, that would sort of compound those risks.
Right. Exactly. I don't think I have anything to add with regard to that stuff.
A+.
You always think of things later, but I did want to bring, because of the kind of podcast that we are, I did want to briefly discuss some of the racial considerations. And that is that, and I think I talked about it a little bit already, people from different ethnic groups have different notions of body and beauty and what's acceptable for that particular group.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so using tools like, BMI, et cetera, can be limiting and used to pass judgment in a way that disconnects our patients from us rather than influencing them to take the best care of themselves.
Right.
And especially for people of color, there are so many factors that come into play because it's not just height and weight. It's sort of our curvy figures and that our culture has valued that's been attractive to our partners.
Yeah.
And so it's in being such, it's been encouraged instead of, not having weight on. And I remember when I was at my thinnest that my ex would say, you gonna stay like that? Well, maybe if you did some exercises that'll kind of like build up a little bit of something. What's happening here? And I'm a confident person, and I just kind of in my mind said, I'm gonna stay like this and you're gonna like it, and then just kind of walk away. But that's not everybody. That's not, some people that would destroy them.
Yeah.
If their loved one made a comment. Well, he's made a similar comment about my stretch marks. He said, are you going to keep those?
That's gold.
And
I love that.
I said, that's my badge of motherhood. Am I going to keep it?
Girl, mine's my badge of puberty. I've been rocking those things since 3rd grade.
Of course I'm going to keep it. And you're going to like it.
Oh, that's amazing.
So anyways, it just depends on the person. But, you have to assume that sensitivity until the person proves that they're strong. And then eventually I just gained and gained and gained. And then I don't think that's what he meant. But too late. It was too late by then. But anyways, it's not just that body, the shape and all that stuff. But, our skin color, our hair, our facial features, just those are all factor into how we view ourselves and our standards of beauty. The fact that we, I haven't had the opportunity to do this, but, we add hair to ourselves and we have makeup, and I use makeup, so I'm not going to tell that lie. But makeup, and for a long time, we couldn't even find makeup that was appropriate for us.
Yeah.
And so things, that kind of stuff, and that certain tones of our skin were perceived to be better than others.
Yeah.
If you were fair skinned, then that's better than being really dark skinned, dark chocolate skinned. If your hair was straighter or curly, that was better than having hair that's like tight, kinky, coiled, or whatever. And so I think that we've made some big strides more of late about beauty and what our sort of our own interpretation and what we see to be beautiful. But weight is definitely a big one. And we don't get the people we admire, they are curvilicious. Your Jill Scotts and your Beyoncés and your I don't even know. I mean, there are so many people that you could call out that aren't
Lizzo, Missy Elliott.
Lizzo, Missy Elliott, even
Queen Latifah.
Even now, the Queen Rihanna now also is she's put a little bit of weight on, and it's not. It's she looks beautiful. She's, speaking of curvilicious, she is curvilicious, and she has a whole new clothing line that includes that's inclusive because it has larger sizes
and lingerie too, which all of her lingerie ads are so amazing and have so many different
body types,
different types of women.
That's really important.
It's
and her
awesome.
makeup has like 40, I don't know, 1,000 shades of types, so that, which we couldn't get from the mainstream,
right?
Or she's mainstream now too, but previously when I was growing up, you couldn't get that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So all of that factored in that we couldn't look like Barbie. We were never going to look like Barbie. So Barbie wasn't who we aspired to look like. And we weren't aspiring to look like the folks in Vogue and the folks because that's not who we are. So we say we like who we are. And that's, it's interesting. I was looking at some body satisfaction studies, and so consistently in most of the studies, it sort of said that in terms of self-image, that sort of Black women have like the highest self-image, that they don't see much wrong with themselves, even when they are overweight or they're categorized as obese. They have a retort like my so-and-so likes it, so bug off, basically. And then Latinx after them, because there's a mix there, because Latinx also they have a lot of the same sort of features, body types, and then white women, and then Asian women more so because they are raised to be concerned for their body types and their weight and that kind of thing. So it was really interesting for me to kind of look at that stuff. And on the one hand, I feel good, but on the other hand, if it's making us unhealthy, then that's a concern.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
So similarly, in the LGBTQIA plus population, there's already a lot of stigma being like a queer person, and you already have a decreased access to safe care, and you may not feel comfortable. So if you compound that with someone who's, overweight or underweight, that provides another barrier for them. We know that the LGBTQIA plus population is at a higher risk for certain health disparities. Lesbian and bisexual women specifically have been shown to be at increased risk for being overweight and obese. And also this population a lot of times has more substance use issues. So things like smoking and alcohol, which can further compound these risks. I think it's super important that, we've talked about this a million times, and we're working on it really hard in our own practice, but just coming up with a wellness model that is inclusive and includes everyone. So no matter what the color of your skin or what culture you are or what your sexuality is, just to be inclusive and making sure that we're really giving every person, no matter who they are, opportunities to have preventative health care, access to safe and inclusive care, non-binary and transgender males, lesbians, bisexual women, anyone that we might be coming in contact with, making sure that they feel that they feel safe and included.
No, I think that's important.
Yeah. And I think those are some of the main points. So should we wrap this up? Is weight more than just a number? How can we keep our patients physically and mentally healthy? I can't talk. I'm struggling today.
She hasn't even been drinking.
I have not. I'm just fading.
That's okay, because we're about to fade to black. That's nice. I think we need to. I think we've emphasized this throughout the podcast today, that we need to approach weight discussions with sensitivity. We need to ask patients how they feel about their weight, and we need to go from there.
That's right.
We don't need to come into the conversation with our own assumptions.
Yep.
And we don't need to. I think it's really hard. If you are an overweight provider, to go tell some overweight person, oh, you're overweight, right? Yep. And that person, they should respond, and have you looked in the mirror?
That's amazing. I really want someone to say that, but we need to make sure that we're avoiding assumptions about diet, activity level, and body perceptions. So remember that person who's underweight may not be super thrilled about it, and similarly, someone who's overweight can totally be healthier and more physically fit than someone of a quote unquote normal weight. So I'm just going to throw it out there again. Lizzo, she does these amazing concerts where she changes her costume 15 times. She is in the entire time singing, rapping, playing the flute while she's dancing, running around that stage for like 90 minutes every night. Okay. So guess what? if your BMI is normal and you're sitting on the couch all day and it's between you and Lizzo doing a relay race with me,
Yeah.
like, bitch, you better believe I'm choosing Lizzo. And we're going to crush you.
She's not going to pick you to be on her
Sorry,
team, even
not.
though you're normal. Your normal weight. She doesn't dig normal. You got to encourage patients to keep at it, whether it's your new increase in activity or attempting to gain a bit of weight, or you just have to be encouraging instead of shaming.
Mm-hmm.
Just body shaming is disgusting, and it needs to stop.
Yeah.
I know people have been making jokes about it for years, calling names and saying, look, and just stop it, because none of us is a perfect specimen.
I'm going to throw myself on the coals too and say we have to stop doing it with ourselves. Yeah, I am like, I totally will do this. I'll always be like, oh yeah, and I'm grabbing my like fupa and I'm, look at this. And someone will say, you look great. And I'm so bad at taking that kind of accolade. Yeah, I'm just like, yeah, okay. You know what's funny? I gained 5 pounds. And they don't care. Like, why are you doing that? So, and we have to stop doing that. So this is a goal. 2020 is a new year. I'm going to start just being a lot more positive about myself. And so I can be a good role model for all of our patients.
I am too. So I'm going to stop. It's still my goal weight. But anyways, I'm going to stop saying that I'm old and I was here when dinosaurs roamed the earth and stuff
I'm going to stop
like
laughing at that.
No, you're not. But that's okay. It's all right. I'm going to, because I'm wiser. Being older means being wiser.
Absolutely. Yep. And finally, just again, we already talked about this, but working together with patients and families, we want to just promote health and realistic goals. So honestly, if you're really overweight, that is not defining for you. And we need to focus on the health part and not just that number on the scale. And be ready to celebrate with our patients and celebrate their achievements. When someone comes in and says, yeah, you know what? I just started back at the gym. It's January and it's hard to not have like a hard eye roll, like, oh, new year, new you. Oh. But like, you know what? That's fucking awesome. So we need to be like, yeah, girl, like that's awesome. Keep at it. Like it takes so much to get up and do that. So we should be celebrating that.
Definitely we should. And when they haven't done anything, despite your list of what you contracted with them to do the previous year, then just say to them, I'm so glad you showed up.
Yeah.
I just tell them, I'm glad you came. You didn't stay away from me just because you didn't do that. I didn't do a bunch of stuff either. So we're all in this together. I
still haven't done my blood
going.
Work from like 2017.
What? Oh my goodness.
I know.
I often use pregnancy as an opportunity to educate or motivate women to want to reform. Because that's when you're captive. You want to have a better diet. You want to, and I say, this is an opportunity to kind of change your ways if you want to, so that your child can learn a better way or a good way of eating when they start to eat food.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen lots of families where like the whole family is wide. So that started because no one ever made a change. And so the kid is doing the same thing that the parents are doing.
Yeah.
And it is that situation is what it is. But I try to use that opportunity because most women who are pregnant will do anything to make sure that baby is healthy.
That's right.
And that the situation they're bringing them into is the best one that they can. So, but, we're not going to re-raise people. Like, be sure of that. And insulting them definitely isn't the answer.
Absolutely.
So just motivate and celebrate. That's what we want to do, and
be respectful,
and still know that you're not the only one who's going through or having suffered anything that you have gone through or suffered regarding your weight.
We're all working on it. Like we're all working on it every single day, and I think that just acknowledging that and being, celebrating people for who they are, no matter what size, that's what we should be doing.
Amen. Not amen.
Yes. Okay. Well, since I can barely talk, I think we're going to wrap it up. So thank you guys so much for listening. We'd like to thank Baobab Tree Studios and especially Eamon and Rev Kev, all of our friends, all of our family, and you, the listeners who make this podcast possible.
For sure. Please be sure to subscribe and like us on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen. And Facebook, Instagram at the Midwife Crisis Podcast, or email us at midwifecrisispodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. We love your comments. Put them, if it's on your site where you listen to podcasts, just add a little comment because we want to hear what you think. Good, bad, in the middle. We want to make this your podcast.
That's right.
Because it's not just you.
Yep.
But it is about you.
That's exactly right. So, I don't know. Until next time, I guess weight for me isn't anything but a number.
And drink a lot of water.
Bye.
Adios.